neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at the installation of the Roadmaster InvisiBrake supplemental braking system on a 2022 Buick Encore GX. When flat towing a vehicle, there's 5 main components that are required, and we're going to start with the base plate. The base plate is attached to the vehicle, to the frame, and that's going to have our arms as well as all of our hookup points for the rest of our connections. So that's the main thing you're going to need on your vehicle. Moving along, you're also going to have a braking system. And the braking system is legally required, and that's going to be sending signals from when you hit the brakes of your RV to the towed vehicle, and that's going to bring it to a stop and slow it down proportionally to the RV. It's going to save a lot of wasted energy and also make it safer on the RV as well as the towed vehicle, because this is going to be slowing down rather than using force to push this forward. Now, some of the other things that we have are going to be the breakaway switch with that braking system, and that's in case of an accidental disconnect. This will pull out, putting the brakes on the vehicle and bringing it to a stop. Some other safety that we have included in those components is going to be your safety chain loops here. Now, this is also in case of an accidental disconnect. We have these cables here attached to our RV as well as the base plate on our vehicle to make sure that they're going to stay connected. We also have our electrical umbilical here, and that's going to send the signals from our RV to the towed vehicle for all of our turn signals as well as our braking system. And then finally, our tow bar, and this is going to be the connection point between the RV and the base plate on the towed vehicle. Taking a closer look at our braking system, you'll see under our driver's seat we've mounted the InvisiBrake box. Now, this is where the electronic components plug into, as well as the airline for our cylinder. You can also adjust the PSI of how hard the brakes are going on. So it is a fairly easy box to mount, as it can be mounted in any different direction, whether it be vertical or horizontal or even crooked. It doesn't have to be flat. You just want to have a spot inside of the vehicle to keep it protected. The actual braking is performed by our bracket mounted here on the brake pedal that attaches to a pulley system, which feeds down to a cable to our piston. So when the signal is called for braking to occur, that piston pulls that cable through the pulley system onto our bracket, pulling the brake pedal. That braking is going to occur whenever our breakaway switch is pulled, which generally is going to be in an emergency case. Now, the other time that it's going to come on is when you're hitting the brakes on your RV, and it's going to send the signal and it's going to allow that brake pedal to move. The great thing is, with this little switch here, you're going to know when the brakes are being applied to your vehicle. So that way, when you're driving down the road, you're not having to worry, are the brakes actually working? When I hit the brakes on our RV, this light will come on, letting us know that the brakes are actually being applied on the towed vehicle. Now, as far as the braking systems go, they are kind of custom fit to vehicles, and so different applications will install slightly differently. And in fact, this one is quite a bit different in the fact that it has electric brakes. A lot of your braking systems, you're going to be tying into the brake booster air hose and to get that extra vacuum. Since we can't do that, we had to change it up a little bit, but I'm going to walk you through all that, and that way we can get a braking system installed on your GX. Now, the braking system install can seem overwhelming, I will admit that. But when you break it down into systems, it's not too bad. And Roadmaster has done a fantastic job in their instructions. It is a little overwhelming when you grab it, and you'll see it's pretty thick. There's lots of information. Just take your time, and step by step, they'll really give you the clues of what you need to be doing versus what not to do. And that way you're installing it safely and properly. And really just planning your attack, making sure it's all laid out properly, and not be afraid to start cutting some things here and there, like your floor insulation. So you will be under the dash for a little bit, not too bad compared to some other vehicles. So hopefully this helps you make the decision and walk you through how to get this installed on your vehicle. So with our braking system, we have this fascia off of the vehicle, and that's because we installed our base plate. And honestly, if you're doing a flat toe setup, it's going to make it a lot easier keeping that fascia off until the very end, and that way you can get all your braking components put in place. Now, let's start with these components. Here we have our breakaway switch. It's going to be simple. It's got a plug, and I've plugged that here and zip tied it up to our base plate. And with this is actually going to feed into the vehicle, as well as we have this wire here, which is going to go onto our 6-pole, and that actually goes for our signal, and that way we can actually tell when we're braking on the camper. So these wires are simply going to route over. And you can route it a bunch of different ways. I found that this works pretty well. I've tucked it here using the factory impact bar. Now, as far as the breakaway switch, there is quite a bit of extra cable, or at least in my install there was, so I just kind of bundled that up, zip tied it in a place where it's not going to cause any issues. Following the wires up, it's going to just kind of tuck over here. Now you're going to see we have wiring from our 4-pole that we originally ran to our diodes. We're also going to tie these in together. So I have some butt connectors that I've made the connection, and so we could join our wiring from the actual box on the braking to our 4-pole. It might be hard to see, but I do have some butt connectors down here. We just splice those in, as they're going to be using that same connection that goes to the front of the vehicle. Now tracing these back a little bit, it is going to feed into a firewall grommet. Now on the grommet, it is kind of tricky to see, but there's a little part that sticks out, and you can actually cut that off, and that's going to be where you can feed your wires in. That's going to make it pretty easy. Now I only did a few of my wires there. The bundle of them I will show where I ran on the inside of the vehicle. So the attachment part to the actual brake pedal to cause the braking is mounted here, and this is going to go to our pulley. Now the pulley can be mounted a bunch of different ways, but on the Encore there's actually this flat spot here, and I've checked underneath for clearances, and this mounts pretty clean, no issues there. So to make it a little bit easier, I cut on this rubber here. Seems to be like sound deadening, and I pulled some of this foam off just so there's not any kind of, tension here on the cable. From there, you can see that I mounted my bracket to where my cable stays, and I've simply routed it down here. So I'm going to peel back the floor a little bit more, and underneath this sound deadening, there's actually quite a bit of space here. And in fact, I'll pull this foam out so you can kind of see. So that cable goes from that bracket, and I just ran it underneath this rubber here. And what it does, I put my bracket here to hold it, and this is going to be hard to see, but it kind of loops, and then it makes its way over here, and I've mounted my cylinder right there. And that seems to be a good spot that's out of the way, and it's pretty easy to mount. There's nothing that you should have to worry too much about as far as any clearance issues on the bottom. And I did trim a little bit just to kind of make this fit, especially on the foam here, just so it sits flat on the floor. So I just kind of went through and scraped some of that off just to create that little bit of space. Now, while I have this off, you're also going to see this is my airline that runs to the box, which I have under the driver's seat. And from there, it goes to the box, and you have your cable connections. Well, that cable connections, you're going to see right here. The reason I did this is there is a plastic grommet here, and this makes it a lot easier to route a big bundle of wires rather than going through a rubber grommet. So I simply drilled down here, put a little wire loom to protect those wires, and these wires here simply run underneath the carpet, and then they kind of poke out right here. So this flap on the carpet by the seat is kind of nice because you can actually feed them through here, and then our box just lives under the seat. So let's take a look at the box from the back side. I've managed to get this to fit pretty well, and what I've done here is I've simply taken some hook and loop here, and I've put it on the bottom side. So you can see just on these edges, and that's just going to sit on the high spots here, and it's really going to hold it in place. It's not going to slide around. And our connections, they're all back here, and those are just simply that air line that I ran through, and then our electrical connections. And so I left a little bit of extra space, and as you can see, this is where I routed it through the carpet. It keeps it all out of the way of things. Now, when putting your box, you're going to want to make sure that you move the seat all the way up, all the way down, move it back and forth, and that way you're not going to have any clearance issues. But I've found that if I place this right on this little back corner here, it's going to hold it in place well enough, and it shouldn't move anywhere. At the top of the pedal, you're also going to see a brake light switch, and what that does is it's going to send the signal to the motorhome to let you know when the brakes are actually being applied. And the way it does that is it uses a plunger, so when that plunger is extended, it knows the pedal is pressed. Now, pretty easy to mount. It just simply sits on the metal of the brake pedal lever, and it mounts to a bracket that's specifically made for this vehicle. So to install that bracket, pretty simple. There's just 2 screws on the underside of the dash where the airbag is, that pulls down, and the bracket pretty much just sits in there. You kind of mount it up, adjust for the length that you need, and now you can send your signal to your motor coach. Now the wiring is pretty simple on this. You're going to tie into a power wire or your 12 volts. So I was actually able to tie into a power wire from the actual InvisiBrake itself, and the other wire is going to route out to the front, and that's going to be part of our 6-pole. Now in your instruction manual, it's going to have you tie into a brake booster, and so you're going to see some one-way check valves as well as some pneumatic air fittings that you would tie in your brakes. That's not the case here because this is an electric brake system. It acts a little bit differently. Instead of pulling that vacuum from there, it's actually just going to pull from the ambient in the vehicle itself. So that makes it a little bit easier as far as the installation goes. Now, as far as our stoplight switch goes, it needs to make the connection to the motor coach itself, to the indicator light and buzzer. In order to do that, we've ran our brake lights switch signal on our vehicle to the open end, and what it's going to do is connect to this actual 7-pin here, and we're going to be able to send that signal through our connection. Now, instead of actually jumping onto the actual plug, I'm actually going to tie it into a wire further back, and that way it's going to keep this clean. But in order to figure out where you're actually going to attach it to, I've gone ahead and looked for the wire that is my brake signal. And once you determine which one that is, which ours happens to be this thick blue wire, you can then tap in with a butt connector to that wire, and then the rest of this wire you're going to run up to the front of the vehicle or where you're going to have your monitor light, and I'll show you how to get that all in place. Now here we are in the RV, and while we tied into that wire in the back, we ran that wire up and made it to the front. Now you can mount this light wherever you want, but having it right here seems like a good option for the driver, and this is going to illuminate when the brakes are being applied on the vehicle, and also there's a little buzzer here that's going to audibly tell you that. Now as far as the installation of it, pretty simple. You're going to want to drill a little hole, and there's a backing plate. Now there's wires here that we're going to be attaching, and this buzzer also will be attached as well. So there's red and white off of this. So first thing, we will make sure that our red attaches to the red. We also have our cable that we ran from the back, and so we're going to butt those all together. On the other side, we have our white wire and our white wire, and we are tying that in to our negative here that we have. So once that's all buttoned up with our butt connectors, we can simply put this back in place, put our screws in, and then once we hit the brakes, once the vehicle's hooked up, we should see this illuminate. Now you may have to be in motion for it to come on, and it might be a couple seconds delayed, but it's a good indicator letting you know that the brakes are actually working. And that was a look at the Roadmaster InvisiBrake on a 2022 Buick Encore GX.